They told her this classroom was for music, not for her. But when she finally picked up her guitar, her teacher didn't just stop her. He destroyed it. In front of everyone, the strings snapped, her dreams splintered, and the room fell silent. But what no one knew was that this was only the beginning. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The morning air carried a crispness that hinted at new beginnings, the kind that made a teenager's chest tighten with both nerves and hope. Amara Johnson stood on the sidewalk just outside Lincoln High School, the sunlight bouncing off the windows of the tall brick building. Around her, students shuffled in with backpacks slung loosely over their shoulders, chatter filling the air. But in Amara's hands, unlike the others, was not just a bag of books, it was her guitar case, worn but loved, the black leather softened from years of her small fingers carrying it everywhere she went. Today was supposed to be the beginning of something brighter. Freshman year, first day of music class. The class she had circled in red ink on her schedule, the one she had imagined for months. She pictured a room full of instruments, classmates who shared her passion, and a teacher who would recognize in her what her mother always had, raw, undeniable talent. She squeezed the handle of the guitar case tighter, whispering a small prayer to herself. Just let me belong here. The hallways of Lincoln High buzzed with a mixture of energy and exhaustion. Some kids greeted each other with loud hugs. Others leaned against lockers, pretending not to care, earbuds stuffed deep. Amara kept her eyes forward, the guitar case knocking gently against her leg with each step. A few heads turned, carrying an instrument to school, always drew attention, but the glances didn't bother her. She thought for once, maybe they'd see her as someone with something special. She found room 207, the music wing. The double doors opened into a space lined with sheet music posters, cabinets of brass and woodwinds, and rows of folding chairs facing a low stage. It smelled faintly of polished wood and old strings. Students were already gathering, some unpacking violins, others clutching sheet music. The room pulsed with anticipation. Amara stepped in quietly, setting her case down at her feet as she scanned the room. At the center stood Mr. Bradley Henson, the music teacher, flipping through a folder with a precision that suggested he valued order above all else. His salt and pepper hair was slicked neatly back, his suit pressed too sharply for a school day. He didn't look like someone who embraced mistakes. "Take your seats," he said without looking up. His voice clipped, carrying authority. Students scrambled into chairs. Amara hesitated, then slipped into the second row, her guitar case resting against her leg like a secret she was preparing to reveal. When Bradley finally glanced up, his eyes scanned the room methodically. They lingered on the violins, the cellos, the clarinets, and then they landed on Amara's guitar case. His brow furrowed for just a second before his expression smoothed into something neutral. But Amara noticed. The first exercise was simple. Introductions. Students shared their name and instrument. One by one, they spoke. Olivia, violin. Daniel, trumpet. Sophia, piano. Each name was met with a small nod from Bradley. When it came to Amara, she sat up straighter, her voice carrying the weight of pride and nerves. Amara Johnson. Guitar. A beat of silence followed. Bradley's lips pressed into a thin line. "We don't typically focus on guitar in this class," he said slowly, as though the word itself was out of place here. "But we'll see." Amara swallowed hard. The girl next to her glanced sideways, eyebrows raised, as if to ask silently, "Did you hear that?" Amara forced herself to nod politely, her hands gripping her case. She wouldn't let one dismissive comment shake her. Not today. As the class began sight-reading a simple piece, Amara waited for her chance. Her turn came, and she opened her case with deliberate care. The guitar gleamed softly under the fluorescent lights, the dark wood polished to perfection despite the small cracks near the edge that told its history. She positioned it carefully, her fingers curling into their familiar places. When she strummed the first chord, the sound resonated through the room, different from the crisp strings of the violins or the airy tones of the woodwinds. It was warmer, fuller, like a voice telling a story that didn't need translation. Heads turned, but not Bradley. His jaw tightened, his pen tapped against his clipboard. Amara's strum faltered, the note hanging in the air, unfinished. She lowered her gaze, cheeks heating. The room shifted back into motion as Bradley moved on, calling out another name, but Amara's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She reminded herself, he just doesn't know me yet. He doesn't know what I can do. Still, something inside her trembled. The rest of the class moved quickly, but Bradley's eyes returned to her often, sharp and assessing, as though the very presence of her guitar disrupted his order. Amara tried to focus on the music, on blending in, but every time she touched the strings, she felt his disapproval pressing down like a weight. She slung the case over her shoulder and stepped into the hallway. For a moment she considered calling her mom, telling her how the first day went, but she couldn't bring herself to let the disappointment spill out yet. Instead, she whispered again, almost like a promise to herself, "I belong here. I do." As she turned back briefly into the classroom, hoping to catch one last glimpse, she saw Bradley. He was standing by his desk staring directly at her guitar case, as if it had no right to exist in his room. His expression tightened, his eyes narrowing with disdain that felt personal, deliberate. And in that single look, Amara realized her fight for a place in this class had only just begun. The teacher's glare fell on Amara's guitar, his expression tightening with disdain. The hum of students returning for the next class felt different for Amara. The room was alive with chatter and movement, but her senses honed in on one thing: Mr. Bradley Henson's sharp gaze. It had followed her all the way out of the room earlier, and now, stepping back inside, she felt the sting of it again. She slid into the same chair as before, laying her guitar case carefully by her side. Her palms still tingled from the brief strum she had dared to play earlier. She wanted to believe that maybe she had imagined Bradley's disapproval, that perhaps she was being overly sensitive, but deep down, she knew she hadn't imagined it at all. Bradley stood at the front of the room with the poise of someone who believed he owned the space. He tapped the edge of the music stand with his baton, the sound snapping the chatter into silence. "All right," he began, his voice crisp. "We're going to sight read a new piece today. Pay close attention to rhythm, tone, and precision. Excellence is expected." The students around Amara straightened, flipping open their folders. Amara waited quietly, her guitar still tucked away, as Bradley distributed sheet music. When he reached her row, his hand hesitated over her desk. He set the sheet down, but looked at her case with pointed disapproval. "Guitar will require some adjustment," he said flatly. Amara met his eyes, trying to keep her voice steady. "I can follow along, sir. I'll play the chords." A few students glanced back, curious. Bradley's mouth tightened. "Chords are not substitutes for structured notes, Miss Johnson. This is not a coffeehouse performance." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter rose from the back row. Amira's stomach knotted, but she forced herself to open her case, moving slowly, deliberately. She would not be embarrassed into silence. But Bradley's eyes narrowed. "Stop." His voice sliced through the room. All instruments silenced. "Miss Johnson." Amara froze, her fingers hovering mid-chord. "You're behind. The rhythm must be precise, not improvised." His words dripped with disdain. Bradley stepped closer, his polished shoes echoing against the floor. "Following?" That sounded like leading. A murmur swept through the class. Some students shifted uncomfortably. Others looked down at their sheets, unwilling to be caught in the crossfire. Amara swallowed hard, heat rushing to her face. "I can adjust," she said finally, lowering her guitar. "See that you do," Bradley muttered, turning back to the podium. The rehearsal resumed. Each time Amara strummed, she felt his gaze cutting through her. He corrected her timing repeatedly. Never the violins, never the brass, only her. Even when she matched perfectly, his baton tapped impatiently. At one point, when another student missed an entrance, Bradley let it slide entirely. But when Amara added a gentle variation, barely audible, he snapped, "Miss Johnson, this is not your stage for experimentation. Discipline is what separates talent from noise." By mid-class, Amara's chest ached with the effort of keeping her composure. She reminded herself of her mother's voice. "Don't shrink. Don't give them the satisfaction." She lifted her chin, forcing herself to keep playing, even as her hands trembled. When it was Amara's turn, her heart hammered against her ribs. She walked to the front, clutching her guitar, and positioned herself on the stool. The class hushed. She began, her fingers coaxing the melody with both delicacy and fire. The notes swelled, filling the room with a richness that drew even the distracted students into silence. For a moment, even Bradley's expression faltered. When she finished, a few students whispered, "That was good." One even clapped softly before stopping, glancing nervously at the teacher. Bradley's response was a cold pause. "It will take a lot of work to refine, but adequate for now." He motioned her back to her seat, as if dismissing her presence entirely. Amara sat down, the faint praise twisted into something hollow. As the rehearsal wound down, Bradley's corrections became sharper. Johnson too heavy-handed, Johnson lagging again. Each criticism isolated her further, making her feel less like a musician and more like an intruder. The others noticed. Their eyes flicked between her and the teacher, some filled with sympathy, others with relief it wasn't them. Then the unexpected happened. At the very end of class, Bradley reached for a stack of audition recordings tapes, submitted anonymously by students for placement in ensembles. He played one, and the room filled with a soulful guitar piece. The melody was intricate, raw with emotion, and undeniably skilled. The class leaned forward, captivated. "Now this," Bradley said, nodding approvingly, "is a fine example of control and expression. Whoever submitted this understands structure while still conveying feeling." Amara's breath caught in her throat. "That was her recording," Bradley continued. "This musician shows potential. The kind of potential I rarely see here." His words carried weight, admiration he had never offered her face to face. A brave student from the back raised his hand. "Sir, isn't that Amara's playing?" The room stilled. Bradley's approving expression froze. His eyes flicked to Amara, then hardened instantly, the warmth vanishing as though it had never been there. He cleared his throat. "Well, even a recording can disguise flaws. We'll revisit this later." Gasps and whispers spread like wildfire. Amara sank lower in her seat. Her pride twisted into something sour. For a brief moment she had been validated, only to have it ripped away when her identity was revealed. As students began packing up, Bradley moved between the rows, his presence heavy. When he reached Amara, he paused. His hand hovered dangerously close to the neck of her guitar, his expression unreadable. Bradley's hand hovered dangerously close to Amara's guitar as if he was itching to take it. The hallway outside was buzzing, students rushing to their next classes. But as soon as Amara stepped through the door, she felt the shift. Heads turned. Conversations dipped, then picked back up in hushed tone. She walked slowly, the guitar heavy on her shoulder, her ears catching fragments of whispers that sliced into her like paper cuts. "Did you hear Henson shut her down again? She thinks she's better than everyone with that guitar." "No, she's actually good. But you know how he is." "Good? Please. He hates when people like her try to stand out." That last one made her stomach drop. People like her. Amara gripped her case tighter, keeping her eyes fixed straight ahead. She had expected to be noticed for her music, not turned into a subject for rumor. Near the lockers, two girls leaned close, their voices sharp enough to carry. Honestly, if she was smart, she'd just stick to choir or something. "But did you hear that solo? That was her recording. She killed it." "Yeah, and look what happened, he basically called it fake." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it burned all the same. Amara wanted to shrink into the floor, but she forced her steps steady. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. At lunch she sat with her tray at a small corner table, away from the loud clusters of students. She poked at her food, appetite gone, when a voice broke through her solitude. "You were amazing, you know." "I mean," he continued, lowering his voice. "That recording? Everyone knew it was you." Henson just couldn't admit it. Amara blinked at him, uncertain. "Why?" Eli shrugged, glancing around. "He's always been like that. You're not the first." Her brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" Leaning closer, Eli spoke carefully, like he was weighing each word. "Last year, there was a girl, Nia. She played piano. Everyone said she was the best in the program. But Henson kept cutting her down. Said she was sloppy, unteachable. She quit before the semester ended." Amara's chest tightened. "She was black too?" Eli's silence was answer enough. He finally nodded. "Yeah, and there were others before her. Not many stick around." Amara swallowed hard, pushing her tray aside. "Why doesn't anyone say anything?" Eli sighed. "Because he runs this place. He's been here for years. Parents love him. The board loves him. If you push back, it's your word against his." The words landed heavy. "Still." Amara met his eyes. "Then why tell me?" "Because," Eli hesitated, then added, "I don't think it's fair. And I don't think you'll give up like the others." Before Amara could respond, a shadow fell over the table. Olivia, a violinist with perfectly pressed hair and an air of authority, stood above them, her tray balanced casually. "You really think it's smart to sit here?" she asked. her tone dripping with condescension. Amara straightened. What do you mean? Olivia's eyes flicked to Eli before settling back on Amira. Everyone's talking. You keep pushing him, you'll just make it worse for yourself. Trust me, it's better to stay in your lane. Eli bristled. She has every right to play. Olivia smirked. Sure, but rights don't matter much when the teacher's the one handing out grades. With that, she walked off, leaving the words hanging in the air, like a warning. Amara stared down at the table, her throat tight. Part of her wanted to storm after Olivia, to demand why she would rather protect Bradley's reputation than defend truth. But another part of her, the quieter, heavier part, knew Olivia was speaking from fear of losing her standing, fear of being marked difficult. The rest of the day blurred. In every hallway, whispers seemed to follow her. Some were admiring, students impressed by her talent. Others were mocking, parroting Bradley's words, questioning whether she belonged. By the final bell, Amara felt like she was walking through two separate schools, one where she was a rising musician, and one where she was nothing more than an intruder. She was packing up her books when she heard it. At first she thought it was just another hallway conversation, but then the voice cut through. Bradley. She froze, book still in her hands, and listened. His voice came from around the corner, speaking to another teacher. These kids, they come in thinking they can change the program, thinking they deserve the spotlight. But kids like her, he chuckled bitterly, they never last. They don't have the discipline. They don't belong in classical training. Maybe in jazz clubs or church basements. But not here. The words hit Amara like a physical blow. Her ears rang, her vision blurred, and her chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. She pressed herself against the lockers, praying he wouldn't notice her there. But his voice carried on, lower now, almost conspiratorial. The worst part is, they actually believe they're talented, and if you let them, they'll drag the whole class down with them. Amara's pulse pounded. Her grip on her books slipped, the corner digging into her palm. She wanted to run, to scream, to confront him, but her feet refused to move. Amara overheard Bradley speaking with another teacher, his words dripping with prejudice about kids like her. Amara barely slept that night. Bradley's words, kids like her, church basements, they never last, looped endlessly in her mind, louder than any melody she had ever played. She replayed the moment in the hallway, wishing she had confronted him, but fear had chained her tongue. By morning, exhaustion sat heavy under her eyes. Still, when she strapped her guitar case over her shoulder and stepped back into Lincoln High, she carried herself with as much dignity as she could muster. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. Your gift is not theirs to take away. She repeated it like a shield, as she walked toward room 2. Inside, the atmosphere was different. The students buzzed with energy. Today was performance day. Each person had prepared a short piece to play before the class, a chance to showcase their progress. For many it was nerve-wracking, but exciting. For Amara it felt like standing on trial. She set her guitar gently beside her chair. Bradley stood at the front, his clipboard in hand, scanning the roster with the cold efficiency of a judge, about to deliver sentences. His eyes flicked briefly to her, then away, as if she were barely worth acknowledgement. All right, he announced, tapping the stand with his baton. Each of you will perform a selection. Remember, clarity, control, and respect for the score. Sloppiness will not be tolerated. The first few students went one after another. Violins sang, clarinets hummed, a cello filled the room with a low, steady resonance. Bradley nodded occasionally, offering curt comments, solid intonation, watch your phrasing, good effort. His feedback was sharp, but not cruel. Then her name, Miss Johnson. Amara felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Her palms grew slick, her throat dry, but she rose steadily, lifting the guitar from its case. The familiar weight settled against her body, grounding her. She moved to the front and sat on the stool, adjusting her posture with care. She had chosen something close to her heart, a rearrangement of a classical piece blended with subtle blues inflections, a nod to her father's style. She wanted to prove she belonged here, that her instrument could hold its own among the violins and flutes. She began. The first notes shimmered, her fingers gliding effortlessly across the strings. The sound was warm and precise, filling the sterile classroom with a depth that made several students lean forward, captivated. She poured herself into every chord, every transition, her body swaying gently as she let the music speak for her. For a brief, precious moment, the weight of Bradley's scrutiny melted. There was only the music and the silence of her classmates listening. She thought she saw admiration flicker in a few faces, even surprise. The guitar carried a voice none of the other instruments could replicate. Soulful, resilient, alive. But then, stop. The word cracked, across the room like a whip. Her fingers froze mid-chord. The resonance of her last note faded awkwardly, leaving a hollow silence. Amara looked up, startled, to see Bradley lowering his baton slowly, his eyes fixed on her with calculated disdain. "That," he said sharply, "is not what was written on the page." A few students shifted uncomfortably. One or two whispered. Amara's stomach clenched, but she forced herself to meet his stare. "I was following the tempo and structure. I didn't change the melody." Bradley's lips curved into a cold smile. "Yet somehow, Miss Johnson, you managed to make it sound like a street performance rather than a recital." Laughter, nervous and awkward, rippled through the back row. Amara's face burned. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor, but she also wanted to scream. Instead, she gripped the guitar tighter, her voice trembling but firm. "I played with feeling. Isn't that the point of music?" The room hushed. No one had ever spoken back to him like that. Bradley's jaw tightened, a flicker of anger flashing across his features. "The point," he said slowly, "is tone icy, is discipline. Without it, music is chaos. And what you just played was chaos, dressed as art." A gasp spread through the room. Amara's chest constricted, shame coursing through her veins like fire. She had bared herself, and he had twisted it into something ugly in front of everyone. Her classmates looked conflicted, some with pity, others with fear, a few with silent admiration they dared not voice. But no one defended her. The silence felt like betrayal. Bradley extended his hand, palm open, as though asking for the guitar. Amara hesitated, then pulled it protectively closer. His eyes narrowed. "Class dismissed," he barked suddenly, slamming his baton against the stand. Chairs scraped, papers rustled, and students gathered their things, their eyes darting between Amara and their teacher as though watching a storm build. Amara sat frozen, her guitar still in her lap, humiliation crashing over her in waves. As the last student filed out, Bradley strode toward her. His polished shoes echoed on the tile. Without asking, he reached for the guitar case on the floor. She quickly bent down, trying to zip it shut first, but his hand came down hard on the lid. The slam reverberated through the room, the sharp sound making her flinch. His eyes burned with something more than irritation. It was resentment, deep and personal, as though her very presence insulted him. Bradley slammed her guitar case shut, his eyes burning with resentment. The slam of the guitar case echoed long after Amara left the classroom. She carried it through the crowded hallways like a fragile part of herself, her head down, her body tense. Students moved past her, their chatter rising and falling, but she heard none of it. Only the throb of humiliation, the replay of Bradley's sneer, chaos dressed as art. "Rough day?" she asked gently, sitting beside her. Amara tried to speak, but her throat tightened. Finally, she managed. "He hates me. He doesn't even try to hide it." Danielle tilted her head. "Mr. Henson?" Amara nodded, her eyes stinging. "He stopped me in the middle of my performance, said I didn't belong, made everyone laugh at me." For a moment Danielle's jaw tightened, a flash of anger clear. But she reached over and took her daughter's hand. "Listen to me, baby. People like him have been trying to keep people like us out of places we belong for generations. That guitar," she glanced at the corner where it rested, "that guitar is more than strings and wood. It's your daddy's voice. It's your voice. Don't you let that man silence it." Amara's chest ached. But what if he's right? What if I don't belong in classical music? Danielle shook her head firmly. "Your father used to play the blues on that guitar every night after his shifts. People said blues wasn't real music, said it was sloppy, too emotional. But do you know what it did? It kept our history alive. It carried pain and joy at the same time. That's what music is supposed to do. And you," her grip on Amara's hand tightened, "you belong anywhere your music takes you." Tears slipped down Amara's cheeks. She leaned against her mother, letting the words sink in like medicine. Danielle brushed her hair gently, her voice softening. "The world doesn't hand us permission slips, Amara. Sometimes we have to walk in and play anyway." That night, Amara pulled the guitar out again. Her fingers trembled at first, But then the chords flowed, filling the apartment with a sound that felt like both rebellion and prayer. Danielle listened from the kitchen, her eyes closing, a smile pulling at her lips. The next morning, Amira carried the guitar back to school. Her steps were steadier this time. She felt the humiliation still clinging to her, but beneath it was something sturdier, resolve. When she entered the music room, whispers rose again. A few students nudged each other, curious to see if she would really show up after yesterday. Amara ignored them, placing her guitar case gently beside her chair. Bradley's head snapped up as soon as he saw it. His eyes narrowed, the faintest twitch crossing his jawline. He hadn't expected her back. At least, not with the instrument. Class began as usual. Scales, warm-ups, sight reading. Bradley moved through the room with his usual sharp precision, correcting posture, marking tempos. But his gaze kept darting back to Amara, sharp and assessing, like he was waiting for her to make a single mistake. She did not give him one. Every note she played was clean, controlled, deliberate. Her hands shook inside, but outwardly she projected calm. The other students noticed. A few even exchanged glances. Impressed, her silent rebellion was not loud or dramatic. It was steady, unyielding. At one point, Olivia whispered to a classmate, just loud enough for Amara to hear, "She's still here?" But there was no ridicule in her voice this time, only disbelief. When the class ended, Amara packed up quickly, ready to leave. But as she zipped her case, Bradley walked slowly toward her. He didn't stop in front of her desk this time. He leaned slightly closer, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "You won't last long here," he muttered, the venom in his tone unmistakable. Amara's chest tightened, but she lifted her head and met his gaze. For once she didn't flinch. She didn't respond either. Instead, she picked up her guitar and walked out, her silence its own kind of defiance. Behind her, Bradley's eyes burned with something darker than irritation. It was a promise, unspoken but heavy in the air. He would not stop until he broke her. Bradley muttered under his breath that Amara won't last long here. She had been practicing relentlessly at home, her fingertips sore from pressing the strings, her bedroom filled with the steady rhythm of determination. Danielle watched from the doorway on more than one night, her arms crossed, pride and worry etched on her face. "Don't let him take this from you," she whispered once. "Play for yourself, not for him." By the time Amara carried her guitar into the rehearsal room, she was ready. Nervous, yes, but ready. The air in room 207 was charged with anticipation. Students tuned their instruments, chatter bouncing off the walls. Bradley stood at the podium, flipping through sheet music with his usual precision. His expression was unreadable, but the tightness in his shoulders suggested he was wound tighter than usual. "Let's begin," he said, his baton slicing the air. The ensemble launched into the opening number, a brisk orchestral piece. Amara blended her chords seamlessly, her rhythm anchoring the sound. She caught glimpses of classmates nodding slightly to her playing, quietly acknowledging that the guitar wasn't out of place. It added something fuller, but Bradley's jaw tightened. Each time he glanced at her, his lips thinned. They moved through two more pieces before reaching the featured number, the one that would define the concert. It was a sweeping arrangement, dramatic and layered. Amara's part was small at first, background chords under the strings, but halfway through she had a solo, the only guitar solo of the entire program. Her pulse quickened as the moment approached. Bradley lifted his baton. "From measure 42. Johnson, your solo. Everyone else give her space." The room quieted. All eyes turned to her. Amara took a breath and began. The first note rang out warm and clear, her fingers steady despite the tremor in her chest. She moved through the melody with precision, but also with soul, her phrasing breathing life into the rigid notes on the page. The guitar's voice filled the room, soft and strong all at once, weaving through the silence. Students leaned in. One girl whispered, "Wow," before being hushed. Even Eli, seated near the back, sat straighter, his eyes fixed on Amara. For the first time in weeks, she felt the joy of music again. Not forced, not desperate, just alive. She wasn't playing for Bradley. She wasn't even playing for the class. She was playing for herself, for her father, for the promise her mother made her carry. But as the final chord lingered in the air, Bradley's voice cut through like ice. "Enough." The baton slammed against the stand. Amara flinched. The room went silent. Bradley stepped down from the podium, his polished shoes echoing ominously as he crossed the floor. He stopped in front of her, his face tight with a fury he was no longer disguising. "That," he said, his voice low but sharp enough to pierce the air, "was indulgent. You dragged the tempo. You overplayed the phrasing. This is not your showcase, Miss Johnson. This is an ensemble. You don't seem to understand the difference." Amara's throat tightened, but she forced herself to respond. "I followed the score. I kept tempo." He reached down. Before Amara could react, Bradley yanked the guitar from her hands. Gasps rippled through the room. Sir Eli half rose from his chair but froze under Bradley's glare. Amara's heart lurched. "Don't." Bradley's grip tightened on the neck of the guitar. For one chilling second, he simply stared at it, his expression twisted with something darker than disapproval, something closer to hatred. Then, with a swift, violent motion, he hurled it across the room. The guitar slammed against the far wall, the crack of splintering wood louder than any note played that day. The sound hung in the air, followed by a stunned silence so heavy it felt suffocating. Amara's breath caught in her throat. Her body refused to move, as if the world had frozen around her. Then the silence broke. Murmurs, gasps, a stifled scream. Someone dropped their bow, the clatter echoing. She stumbled forward, falling to her knees beside the shattered pieces of the instrument. Her hands hovered over the broken body of the guitar, the splintered neck, the strings dangling uselessly. Her father's guitar, her father's voice, gone in an instant. Her chest heaved, but no sound came out. She couldn't breathe, couldn't cry, couldn't speak. Bradley stood unmoved, his baton still in one hand, his expression cold, almost satisfied. No one dared to speak. No one dared to move. The room was filled with the sound of Amara's shallow, broken breaths. As she knelt by the wreckage, Amara fell to her knees beside the shattered instrument. Unable to breathe, the sound of splintering wood still echoed in Amara's chest as she knelt on the cold floor. The guitar, her father's guitar, lay in fractured pieces against her knees. She tried to gather them into her arms, her hands trembling, but each shard cut her deeper than the last. Nobody moved to help. The other students stared, wide-eyed, their faces pale with shock. But when Bradley's eyes swept the room, sharp and expectant, they all dropped their gazes to the floor. Some fiddled nervously with their sheet music. Others shoved their instruments into cases as quickly as possible. The silence was deafening. Amara's voice cracked as she finally whispered, "Why? Why would you do that?" Bradley stood tall, his baton still in his hand like a weapon of authority. His expression was composed now, as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. "It was an accident," he said coldly. "You were careless. You didn't have control of your instrument. These things happen." "Enough," his voice thundered through the room, making several students flinch. "You will not disrupt my class with theatrics. Sit down and compose yourself." The humiliation hit harder than the breaking wood. Tears stung Amara's eyes, but she bit her lip to keep them from falling. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Slowly, she pulled the broken body of the guitar into her arms and rose, her legs shaking beneath her. Bradley turned back to the podium as if dismissing her entirely. "Class dismissed," he barked. Chairs scraped loudly as students hurried out, the sound of scuffling shoes echoing against the tiled floor. A few glanced at her on their way out. Eli lingered for a moment, his mouth opening as though he might say something, but then his eyes darted to Bradley, and he walked out with the rest. When the room was empty, Amara slipped out too, her arms wrapped protectively around the shattered pieces. Each step down the hallway felt heavier, as if the weight of shame was pressing her into the floor. Students passing by looked at her curiously, whispering, but she kept her eyes down. By the time she reached home, she collapsed onto her bed, cradling the broken guitar like a child. The scent of old wood and worn strings clung to her hands, a cruel reminder of what she'd lost. Danielle found her there later, her voice breaking when Amara finally confessed. "He threw it, Mom. He took it from me and threw it like it was trash." Danielle's eyes filled with fire. "That man doesn't deserve to stand in front of students. He doesn't deserve to stand in front of you." She sat beside her daughter, brushing back her hair. "But listen to me, Amara. He didn't break you. He only broke an instrument. The music is still in you." Amara wanted to believe her. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Bradley's sneer, heard the laughter of a few students, felt the sting of silence from the rest. The next day at school was worse. Bradley's story spread quickly, twisted and repainted. He tried to catch it, but it slipped. She freaked out way too much. She's dramatic, always trying to get attention. By lunch, the whispers were everywhere. Amara sat alone, her tray untouched. Groups of students glanced her way, their eyes darting back down when she looked up. Even those who had admired her talent before now avoided her gaze, afraid of being pulled into her orbit. When she walked into music class again, she carried only the empty case. Bradley barely looked at her. Instead, he addressed the class smoothly, his voice practiced. Yesterday was unfortunate. Instruments are delicate. It's a lesson in responsibility. Carelessness can ruin what you value most. His eyes flicked briefly to Amara, but his tone never wavered. Several students nodded, taking his words at face value. Amara's stomach churned. The lie was seamless, the manipulation sharp. He had rewritten the narrative, and she was powerless to stop it. She sat through the rehearsal in silence, the empty case beside her like a coffin. She didn't touch it, didn't even glance at it. Every correction Bradley gave was directed at someone else now. It was as if she no longer existed, and somehow that was worse than his cruelty. It was erasure. Days passed like that. She stopped practicing at home, stopped humming under her breath in the hallways. Music, once her lifeline, felt like a wound she couldn't touch without bleeding. Amara's voice was hollow. He already did. Danielle's chest ached, but she didn't push further. She knew grief when she saw it. By the end of the week, Amara wondered if she should quit the program altogether. The thought terrified her, but so did staying. She felt trapped, suffocated by silence, betrayed by the people who had seen and chosen to look away. And then something shifted. At the end of another long, heavy rehearsal, as she packed her books slowly, a folded slip of paper landed on her desk. She looked up quickly, but the classroom was a blur of students rushing for the door. Whoever had left it was gone. Her heart pounded as she unfolded it, her hands trembling. The note was simple, written in rushed handwriting. Amara froze, the words burning into her mind. For the first time since the shattering, she wasn't entirely alone. A single student slipped her a note after class. I saw everything. The note trembled in Amara's hand long after the classroom emptied. I saw everything. Just 4 words, scrawled in rushed handwriting, but they carried more weight than any chord she had ever played. For the first time since her guitar had shattered against the wall, she didn't feel completely invisible. Someone had witnessed the truth. She tucked the note carefully into her notebook, her pulse quickening. Whoever left it had chosen anonymity, but the message was clear. She wasn't as alone as Bradley wanted her to believe. The next morning, she walked into the music room with her head held a fraction higher. The whispers hadn't vanished. Students still darted looks her way, still murmured half-believed versions of Bradley's accident story. But now she listened differently. Beneath the noise, there was something new: hesitation, doubt. During a break, as she sat alone near the back with her empty case, Eli drifted over, his clarinet still in his lap. He kept his voice low, eyes darting to make sure Bradley wasn't listening. Amara, he whispered, that wasn't your fault. I know it. Her chest tightened. Then why didn't you say something? His shoulders slumped. Because he ruins people. I've seen it. My first year here, there was a trumpet player, Marcus. Bradley failed him out for lack of discipline. But Marcus was good. Really good. Eli swallowed. He just didn't fit Bradley's picture of what talent should look like. And everyone knew why. Amara studied him, anger and sorrow mixing. Because Marcus was black too. Eli's silence was confirmation. He glanced around before leaning closer. You're not imagining this. It's not just you. Before she could respond, Olivia approached. Amara stiffened, expecting another sharp warning to stay in her lane. But Olivia's face looked different this time. Less smug, more uneasy. Amara frowned. Sophia, she's Latina. Olivia nodded. Exactly. He gave it to someone else. Someone who fit his idea of serious. Her lips pressed into a tight line. Don't think I'm defending you. I'm not your friend. But what he did to your guitar. She shook her head. That wasn't discipline. That was hate. She walked away before Amara could answer, leaving a silence that spoke louder than her words. By the end of the week, 2 more students found excuses to brush past Amara after class, muttering quiet acknowledgments. It wasn't your fault. We know what he did. None of them dared say it aloud in front of Bradley, but the whispers were becoming threads of truth weaving quietly around her. Still, fear reigned. In the cafeteria, she overheard one boy mutter, I'm not sticking my neck out for her. He'll tank my grade. Another added, yeah, better to keep quiet. Their words stung, but they also revealed the truth. Bradley's power thrived not because students believed him, but because they were too scared to resist. Amara began noticing the way others flinched under his corrections. How certain students, usually the ones who didn't fit his narrow mold, were always criticized harder, always overlooked for praise. It wasn't just her, she had been targeted more violently. Yes, but the pattern was everywhere once she allowed herself to see it. One afternoon, as she packed her books, Eli lingered by her desk again. His voice was barely above a whisper. You're not going to quit, are you? She hesitated. I thought about it. Don't. His eyes were earnest now, more determined than before. He wants you to quit. That's how he wins. But if you stay, he lowered his voice further. If you stay, we can do something. Eli glanced nervously at the door, then back at her. His face was pale, but his words came out steady. Because there's proof. Real proof. Her pulse skipped. Proof of what? Eli swallowed hard. Of what he did. Someone recorded it. The whole thing. Amara froze, her heart thundering. The splintering crash. The suffocating silence. Bradley's lie captured. The possibility of it sent a shock through her veins. Who? She demanded, her voice sharp with urgency. Eli shook his head. I can't say. Not yet. But I swear it's real. Her breath quickened. If it was true, if there really was a recording, it could shatter Bradley's version of the story. It could break the silence that had suffocated her since that day. She touched the folded note still tucked into her notebook. I saw everything. Now she wondered if the same hand that wrote those words was the one holding the recording. Either way, for the first time since her father's guitar lay in ruins, she felt something stir beneath her grief. Not just survival. Not just silence. A seed of justice was growing. One student told Amara there was a recording of the incident. The words replayed in Amara's head all night. Someone recorded it. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, her heart pounding at the thought. Proof, a weapon against the silence that had crushed her since that day. But by morning, doubt gnawed at her. What if Eli was mistaken? What if the recording didn't show everything? Worse, what if it never surfaced at all? She carried the weight of uncertainty into class. Bradley moved with his usual rigid control, his commands snapping through the room. But Amara noticed something new, students' eyes flicking between her and him more often, whispers that cut off abruptly when he turned his head. A current of tension hummed beneath the surface. By the end of the week, the current erupted. It started small. A video link appeared in a group chat between orchestra students, then another, and another. By lunchtime, nearly everyone in the cafeteria had their phone in hand, screens glowing with the same footage. The video began shakily. Someone had clearly filmed from their lap, the angle slightly tilted, but the sound was unmistakable. Amara's guitar filled the room with a soulful solo, each note carrying strength. The camera jolted as Bradley's voice cut in, sharp, belittling, and then the moment that changed everything. His hand yanking the guitar from her, the violent hurl across the room, the sickening crack of wood against the wall. Gasps filled the recording, followed by the stunned silence of the class. And there, clear as day, Bradley's cold dismissal. It was an accident. The clip was less than 2 minutes long, but it was damning. By the end of the day, it had spread beyond the school group chats and onto TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Hashtags sprouted like wildfire. Justice for Amara. Teacher exposed. Music not hate. The comments poured in. Unbelievable. He should be fired immediately. That poor girl. Imagine losing her dad's guitar like that. This is why we speak up. Teachers like him ruin lives. But not all of them were supportive. She must have provoked him. Looks staged. Kids these days will do anything for attention. Not seeing the full context here. By evening, parents had caught wind. Some called the school demanding answers. Others defended Bradley, calling him a respected teacher, who was surely being misrepresented. The community split sharply down the middle, half crying for justice, half clinging to the man they thought they knew. At home, Amara sat frozen in front of her phone, as the video played again and again. Danielle sat beside her, one hand on her daughter's back. Baby, Danielle whispered, this changes everything. People can't deny it now. But Amara's voice shook. They'll still try. Some of them already are. She scrolled through the comments, her stomach twisting at the accusations. Liar. Attention seeker. Problem student. Danielle gently took the phone from her hands. Let them talk. The truth is there, Amara. And the truth has a way of burning through the lie. The next day at school was chaos. Students crowded hallways, buzzing with debate. Some approached Amara quietly, offering words of encouragement. Others avoided her altogether, wary of being pulled into the storm. Olivia passed her at her locker, pausing just long enough to murmur, "It's out now, he can't hide." But Amara also caught the glares. Students who muttered under their breath, who repeated Bradley's line that it had been an accident. The battle lines had been drawn. In the teacher's lounge, Bradley's name was on everyone's lips. Some staff members shook their heads, saying the video looked bad but surely didn't show the whole story. Others, younger and less entrenched in the system, whispered that it was indefensible. Bradley himself walked the halls with an expression like cracked porcelain, composed at the edges, but ready to shatter. His jaw clenched when he caught students staring. His voice, usually sharp, now carried a brittle edge, as though he was fighting to maintain control. That afternoon, Bradley snapped. He stormed out of class, his footsteps echoing down the corridor like thunder. His fists clenched around the stack of sheet music he carried, papers crumpling in his grip. He pushed through the office doors without knocking, startling the secretary. "Where is she?" he barked. The principal, Laura Whitman, looked up from her desk as he barged into her office. "Bradley, what on earth?" "She's behind this," he cut in, his voice shaking with rage. "That girl, she's spreading lies, and now my reputation is being dragged through the mud. You need to put a stop to it." Whitman blinked. "The video is misleading," he snapped, completely taken out of context. "You know me, Laura. You know I've given years to this school. And now because of one defiant student, my career is on the line." Whitman folded her hands calmly. "I've seen the video. It looks very bad." Bradley slammed the crumpled music against her desk. "Then expel her. Expel her for slander, for insubordination, for whatever excuse you need. If she's gone, this dies down. If she stays, this school burns with me." The words hung in the air, heavy and threatening. Outside the office, Amara had just arrived with a late slip in her hand. She froze at the door, her breath catching as she heard her name fall from his lips. Bradley angrily stormed into the principal's office, demanding Amara be expelled for lying. All right, Section 10 is where the story expands into institutional conflict. It's no longer just Amara versus Bradley. It's Amara versus a system that values reputation over justice. This section needs to feel tense and suffocating, like a courtroom scene where truth is battling spin. Amara stood outside the principal's office, her late slip still clutched in her hand, frozen by the sound of Bradley's furious voice. "Then expel her. Expel her for lying." Her breath caught, her chest tightening as though invisible hands had wrapped around her throat. She pressed herself against the wall, listening, her heart hammering against her ribs. Inside, Principal Laura Whitman's calm voice cut through. "Bradley, shouting will not help your case." "My case," he snapped. "My career is on the line because of a staged video. That girl, she's manipulative. She's undisciplined. She's poisoning the program. If you don't act, the school will pay the price." Whitman sighed heavily. "The board has already called an emergency meeting. This is bigger than you or Amara now." Amara's stomach dropped. An emergency meeting. She could barely breathe at the thought of standing in front of adults who might not see her truth, who might choose to protect their reputation instead of justice. That evening, Danielle received the official notice in her email. Amara and her parent were required to attend a disciplinary review. The words blurred on the screen, as Amara read them over her mother's shoulder. "They're putting me on trial," she whispered. Danielle squeezed her hand. "No, baby. They're putting him on trial, and we'll make sure the truth comes out." The next day, the library conference room was transformed into a tribunal. A long table stretched across the front where board members sat in stiff rows. Behind them, stacks of files and laptops gave the illusion of order. At the center sat Principal Whitman, her face composed but tense. Bradley was already there when Amara and Danielle walked in. He wore a pressed suit, his tie perfectly knotted, his expression one of righteous indignation. His lawyer sat beside him, shuffling papers with quiet efficiency. Amara clutched her notebook, the folded "I saw everything" note still tucked inside. Her hands trembled, but she lifted her chin. "Let's begin," Whitman said, her tone firm. The board chair, A man named Mr. Graham adjusted his glasses. We are here to review allegations regarding Mr. Bradley Henson and his conduct in the music program. Both sides will be heard. Bradley wasted no time. He leaned forward, his voice smooth and rehearsed. I have given this school 20 years of service. My record speaks for itself. This entire situation has been blown out of proportion by a manipulated video, shared without context. One board member asked, "What do you mean by manipulated?" The clip circulating online shows only fragments, Bradley said quickly. Miss Johnson was argumentative, disruptive, and careless with her instrument. I attempted to intervene, and in the process, the guitar was damaged. Unfortunate, yes. Intentional? Absolutely not. Danielle's hand tightened around Amara's. She whispered, "Stay strong." When it was Amara's turn, her voice shook at first, but she forced herself steady. That guitar, it wasn't just an instrument. It belonged to my father. He played it every night before he passed away. It was the last piece of him I had. A murmur ran through the room. Amara swallowed hard. I didn't drop it. I didn't mishandle it. Mr. Henson ripped it from my hands and threw it. I saw it. Everyone in that class saw it. Her eyes flicked toward the teachers sitting quietly in the back, toward the students who had gathered outside the glass walls of the library. Some avoided her gaze, but a few nodded faintly, silently affirming her words. One board member leaned forward. Miss Johnson, the video clearly shows the guitar being thrown. Why do you believe Mr. Henson would do this? The question made her chest tighten. She wanted to say it plainly. Because I am black. Because he doesn't think people like me belong in classical music. But the words felt too heavy, too dangerous, in that sterile room. She settled on, because he never wanted me there. Every mistake was magnified. Every note I played was wrong in his eyes. He's tried to silence me from the first day. Bradley slammed his hand on the table. That is slander. Enough, Whitman warned, raising a hand. The tension crackled. For a moment the room felt on the edge of breaking apart. Hours dragged on as both sides argued. Bradley's lawyer cited his awards, his reputation, glowing testimonials from parents, whose children thrived under his direction. Danielle countered with quiet but fierce determination, reminding the board of their responsibility to protect all students, not just the ones who fit neatly into Bradley's box. By the time deliberations ended, the air was thick with exhaustion. Principal Whitman finally rose. Her voice was measured, but her eyes betrayed the strain. After reviewing the evidence, including the video, the board has reached a decision. Amara's breath caught. Mr. Henson will be placed on temporary suspension, effective immediately. The words landed like a stone in her stomach. Suspension. Temporary. She clenched her fists under the table, rage burning through her. He had destroyed her father's guitar, humiliated her, lied about her, and all they could muster was a pause in his career. But Whitman continued, her tone tight. At this time the board does not find sufficient grounds for termination. Mr. Henson will remain employed, pending review. Danielle's hand shot to her mouth. Disbelief etched across her face. Amara's body trembled with anger. Around the room, whispers broke out. Some shocked, some relieved. Bradley leaned back in his chair slowly, a smug smile creeping across his face. He had taken a hit, yes, but he wasn't defeated. Amara stared at him, tears blurring her vision, and realized the truth. The fight wasn't over. The board announced a temporary suspension for Bradley, but refused to fire him. The decision hit the town like a lightning strike. Suspension, not termination. It was enough to make headlines, but not enough to settle the outrage. By the next morning, Lincoln High wasn't just a school, it was a battleground. Parents crowded the sidewalks, voices raised, signs lifted high. Some shouted for justice, their posters painted with words like "Protect Black Students" and "Music Not Hate." Others came to defend Bradley, holding signs that read "Decades of Service" and "Don't Ruin a Good Man's Career." The chants clashed in the air, a cacophony that rattled the windows of the school. Students peered out nervously, teachers tried to shepherd them inside, and news vans parked at the curb, their cameras zooming in on the spectacle. Amara arrived through the side entrance, her hood pulled low over her head. She could hear the protesters before she saw them, their voices vibrating through her chest. Every step felt like walking into a storm. Inside, the whispers started before she even reached her locker. My mom says she's lying. Well, my dad says Bradley's been racist for years. She's tearing this school apart. By lunchtime, the cafeteria was divided. One side buzzed with students scrolling through their phones, sharing videos of protesters chanting her name. The other side muttered about drama queens and attention seekers. Olivia sat near the middle, her tray untouched. When Amara walked past, Olivia caught her eye and gave the faintest nod. Not solidarity exactly, but acknowledgement. Amara clung to it like a lifeline. Later that afternoon, Danielle picked her up from school. The car ride was quiet at first, the sounds of protesters fading as they pulled away. Finally, Amara whispered, "Why do they hate me? They don't even know me." Danielle's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "They don't hate you, baby. They hate what you represent. You make them face something they'd rather ignore." Amara stared out the window, tears blurring the trees. As they passed, "I don't know if I can keep doing this. It feels like everyone's watching me, waiting for me to mess up." Danielle glanced at her daughter, her voice soft but steady. "You're stronger than you think, and you're not alone. Not anymore. Look at those people chanting for justice. Look at the students who slipped you that note. They see you, Amara. They believe you." But Amara wasn't sure belief was enough. Not when the other half of town seemed just as loud, just as determined to silence her. That weekend, the story exploded further. A local news station aired a segment titled, "Discipline or Discrimination? Community Divided Over Music Teacher." The footage cut between clips of the viral video interviews with parents and a short clip of Bradley outside his home. "I have dedicated my life to teaching," he told the reporter, his voice steady, his expression pained. "This is a misunderstanding that has been twisted into something it's not. I care deeply about all of my students." Then the camera cut to Danielle, standing on her porch, her voice shaking with emotion. "My daughter's truth is right there in that video. What he did can't be undone. He broke more than a guitar. He tried to break her spirit, but she's still standing." The clip aired across multiple stations, and the comments online grew harsher, sharper. Supporters called Amara brave, a hero for standing up. Detractors called her a liar, a problem student trying to ruin a respected teacher's career. Amara scrolled through them late at night, her face illuminated by the screen. Each cruel comment felt like a dagger. She's overreacting. She's weak. She's playing the victim. She slammed the phone down and buried her face in her pillow, muffling the sobs that shook her body. Danielle heard from the hallway, but didn't interrupt. She knew her daughter needed to let the pain out before she could face the world again. On Monday, the protest outside the school doubled in size. Police stood watch as two crowds screamed over each other, their chants colliding like waves. Fire Bradley clashed with Stand with Bradley. The tension was palpable, the air electric with hostility. Inside, Amara walked through the halls like a ghost, her backpack weighing heavy. Students filmed her on their phones as she passed, whispering, posting, turning her life into content. She felt like a headline, not a person. That afternoon, she found Eli waiting by her locker. His voice was quiet but urgent. "They're not gonna stop, not unless something bigger forces them to." Amara frowned. "Bigger than the video?" Eli hesitated, his eyes darting nervously. "There's more. Stuff about him. Complaints. Things he's covered up. People just need the courage to bring it out." Amara's stomach twisted. If there were more, then Bradley's downfall wasn't just about her. It was about years of silence waiting to break. Before she could respond, the bell rang. The tide of students swept between them, carrying Eli away. That evening, Danielle checked the mailbox before coming inside. Mixed among the usual bills and flyers was an unmarked envelope, plain and thin. She tore it open casually, then froze. Inside was a single sheet of paper, with words printed in block letters. "Tell your daughter to stop, or you'll regret it." Danielle's breath caught. Her hands shook as she stared at the threat, bile rising in her throat. She looked back toward the apartment, where Amara's guitar case still sat empty in the corner, and knew instantly this was bigger, darker, and more dangerous than she had feared. Amara's mother received a threatening letter in their mailbox. Danielle read the threatening letter 3 times before folding it back into the envelope. Her hands trembled, but when she walked inside, she forced her expression calm. She tucked the paper under a stack of unopened bills, hiding it from Amara for the moment. Her daughter had already endured too much. This would only tighten the noose around her spirit. But Amara sensed something anyway. That night at dinner, she caught the way her mother's fork lingered midair, the way her gaze drifted to the window, as though expecting shadows to move outside. "Mom," Amara asked quietly. Are you okay? Danielle blinked, forcing a smile. I'm fine, baby. Just tired. But Amara wasn't fooled. She'd seen that same look in her mother's eyes when her father was alive. In the days after he lost his job unfairly. The look of someone carrying weight too heavy to speak aloud. Later, alone in her room, Amara sat staring at the corner where the broken guitar leaned. She hadn't touched it in weeks. Every glance at it reopened the wound. A reminder of Bradley's hand ripping it from her grip. Of the way the wood splintered on impact. She pressed her palms over her eyes until stars sparked in the darkness. Her phone buzzed with another notification. Another comment. Another stranger online, dissecting her life like it was a case file. Some called her strong. Others called her a liar. The noise was endless. She almost turned it off until she stumbled onto a clip someone had posted. It wasn't the viral video this time. It was a short, grainy recording of her practice from months ago. Back before all this began. Someone must have captured her playing at a talent showcase. The caption read, "This girl deserves better. Listen." Her voice, raw and full, filled the tiny screen. For the first time in weeks, Amara felt something stir inside her chest. Not pain, not anger. Something gentler. The reminder that before the chaos, before the humiliation, she had loved music simply for what it was. She whispered to herself, "He can't take this from me." The next morning, she did something she hadn't dared in weeks. She knocked on her neighbor's door. Mr. Clarence, a retired mechanic with kind eyes and a slow drawl, answered with surprise. "Morning, Amara. Haven't seen you in a while." She shifted nervously. "Mr. Clarence? Do you still have that old guitar you showed me once? The one in your garage?" His brows rose. "That thing? It's older than I am. Doesn't stay in tune half the time. Can I borrow it?" He studied her for a moment, then disappeared inside. When he returned, he carried the scuffed, weathered instrument in his hands. The wood was faded, the strings slightly rusted, but it was intact. "Whole. It's yours," he said simply. "Just promise me you'll play it loud enough for the whole block to hear." That afternoon, she carried the guitar to the park near her apartment. She chose a bench beneath an oak tree, away from the playground noise but close enough for passers-by to hear. Her fingers trembled as she strummed the first tentative chord. The sound was uneven, tinny compared to her father's guitar, but still, music. She closed her eyes, letting her voice rise with the strings. At first she sang softly, afraid of being overheard. But the longer she played, the more her chest loosened, the more her voice grew. The song she chose wasn't classical, wasn't blues, wasn't anything Bradley would ever approve of. It was hers. Bits of melody she had scribbled in notebooks, fragments of words she had whispered when no one else could hear. When she finally opened her eyes, 2 little kids were standing nearby, watching with wide smiles. "That was pretty," one said shyly. The kids ran off, but others had noticed too. A jogger slowed, pulling out his phone to record a few seconds. A mother with a stroller paused, swaying gently to the rhythm. By the time Amara stopped, a small cluster of strangers clapped quietly before dispersing. Her cheeks flushed, but for the first time in weeks, the heat wasn't from shame, it was from something alive. She returned the next day, and the next. Each time the crowd grew. At first it was just a handful of people passing by. Then it became regulars. The jogger who always stopped for a verse. The older woman who brought her dog and sat on the grass. The group of teenagers who cheered every chorus. Phones came out more often. Short clips posted online. Soon hashtags like Amara Plays and Strings of Strength appeared beneath the videos. The comments filled with encouragement. She turned pain into art. This girl's voice is unreal. Forget that teacher. She's already a star. Bradley's name still lingered in the background, tied to her story, but with each new video, her music began to eclipse his cruelty. People weren't just talking about what she'd endured. They were talking about what she could do. At home, Danielle watched the clips late into the night, tears in her eyes. "Look at you," she whispered, brushing Amara's hair back after one long evening in the park. "Your father would be so proud. You're making sure his voice lives on." Amara hugged her tightly. "I thought it was gone, but it's not. It's still here." One Saturday the crowd was larger than ever. Dozens gathered on the grass, some holding signs of support from the protests, others just curious onlookers. Amara sat beneath the same oak tree, her borrowed guitar balanced on her lap, the late afternoon sun casting gold across her skin. She sang with everything she had, Each note carried grief, resilience, and defiance all at once. The applause at the end rolled like thunder, strangers shouting her name. She smiled, breathless, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. As the crowd dispersed, a man approached slowly, his hands tucked into the pockets of his denim jacket. He was older, with salt and pepper hair, and the kind of presence that drew quiet attention. "You've got something rare," he said, his voice deep and steady. Amara blinked, still catching her breath. "I'm just trying to play again." He smiled faintly. "You're not just playing, you're reaching people. My name's Marcus Lane. I've been in the local music scene for 30 years, played with everyone from bar bands to touring acts. And I'm telling you, you've got a gift. If you're willing, I'd like to mentor you, show you what to do with it." Amara's breath caught. A stranger, but not just any stranger, a musician with experience, offering her a bridge she never imagined crossing. Her hands tightened on the guitar as disbelief and possibility tangled inside her chest. A well-known local musician offered to mentor her. The night of the winter concert arrived like a storm Amara had been bracing for her entire life. Lincoln High's auditorium glowed under the stage lights. Rows of polished chairs lined with parents, community members, and reporters eager to see what had drawn so much controversy. The lobby buzzed with tension, whispers about the viral video, speculation about Bradley's suspension, and curiosity about whether the girl at the center of it all would even show. Amara stood backstage clutching the borrowed guitar Marcus had helped her tune earlier that evening. It wasn't her father's, but the weight of it still grounded her. Marcus had been mentoring her for weeks, teaching her not only technique but resilience, how to let pain transform into music rather than silence. "Deep breath," Marcus murmured, resting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Remember, you're not playing for them. You're playing to them. Make them feel what you've lived." The concert began with traditional performances, the orchestra sweeping through classics, the choir harmonizing with precision. Applause followed each piece, polite but expectant. The tension in the air lingered, though everyone knew the performance they were waiting for. Finally, Principal Whitman stepped onto the stage, her voice carrying through the microphone. "Tonight we are reminded that music is not only about discipline and skill, but about truth and expression. Please welcome Amara Johnson." The applause was hesitant at first, a mix of curiosity and support, but it swelled as Amara stepped into the spotlight. She settled onto the stool at center stage, the guitar across her lap. The lights were hot against her skin, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it might drown out the first note. She looked into the sea of faces, some expectant, some skeptical, some quietly rooting for her, and then let her gaze rise higher to the empty balcony where she imagined her father sitting, smiling, waiting. Her fingers found the first chord. The song began softly, almost like a prayer. It was one she had written herself, a blend of blues, folk, and soul, a piece stitched together from her father's influence and her own voice. The lyrics spoke of loss, of carrying weight too heavy for her years, but also of defiance, of refusing to be erased. Each note rang with honesty. Her voice trembled at first, but the guitar steadied her, grounding her in rhythm. Slowly, the auditorium fell silent. The shuffling, the whispers, the nervous coughs, all faded, until nothing remained but her sound. Tears glistened in a few audience members' eyes. Parents reached for their children's hands. Even some of the students on stage behind her watched with awe, their instruments lowered, their eyes fixed on the girl who refused to be silent. Backstage, Bradley stood just out of the spotlight, his arms crossed, his face pale and tight. He had insisted on attending despite his suspension, calling it his program. At first he'd sneered when Amara walked out, muttering under his breath. But now, as the song filled the hall, his composure cracked, his jaw clenched, his fingers twitching at his side. He had spent years controlling the narrative, shaping talent to fit his rigid mold, silencing those who didn't. And yet here she was, commanding the room with nothing but her truth. Amara reached the bridge of her song, her voice breaking into a soaring crescendo. "This is for the ones who were told to be quiet. This is for the strings that were snapped in anger. This is for the voices that carried anyway." She strummed the final chord, letting it echo until the sound faded into nothing. And then, applause. Not polite, not hesitant, thunderous. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even shouting her name. The sound washed over her like light breaking through darkness. Tears filled her eyes, but this time, they weren't from pain. For the first time since her guitar shattered, she felt whole. But the triumph was too much for Bradley. From the shadows, his voice rang out, sharp and venomous. "This is a circus. She doesn't belong here. This isn't real music." Gasps rippled through the audience as heads turned toward the wings. Bradley had stepped halfway onto the stage, his face red, spit flying with each word. Principal Whitman rushed forward, her voice urgent. "Mr. Henson, stop." Parents shouted back. Students booed. The thunderous applause turned into a roar of outrage, the audience rising against him. Two security guards moved quickly from the aisles, striding onto the stage. Bradley resisted at first, pointing furiously at Amara, his words breaking into incoherent insults. Amara sat frozen, the guitar still in her lap, her heart pounding. She had expected resistance, but not this public unraveling. The guards flanked him, each gripping an arm. The crowd's noise swelled as they dragged him toward the exit. His voice cracked as he shouted one final insult into the mic stand, his words nearly drowned by the jeers. And then he was gone, escorted out into the night. The applause returned louder than before, shaking the auditorium. Amara closed her eyes, gripping the guitar tightly, and felt the victory settle deep in her bones. Bradley was escorted out by security after shouting insults mid-performance. The night of the winter concert lived far beyond the auditorium. Within hours, clips of Amara's performance flooded the internet. Her voice, raw and steady, played on repeat across TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. The videos captured not just her music, but Bradley's outburst. His face red with rage, his voice spitting venom, his arms dragged away by security. By morning, the narrative had shifted completely. No longer was Amara just the girl whose guitar was destroyed. She was the young musician who had stood tall in the face of hate, silencing it with art. The hashtags changed too. Narrow rises, strings of justice, fire Henson. Even local news anchors struggled to remain neutral. One broadcast replayed the viral clip of Bradley's meltdown before cutting back to the reporter, who asked bluntly, "Is this the man parents want teaching their children?" The school board could no longer hide behind temporary suspensions. The following week, another emergency meeting was called. This time the library overflowed. Parents filled every seat. Students stood pressed against the walls. Reporters huddled outside with microphones. Amara sat near the front beside Danielle, her hands clasped so tightly they ached. Principal Whitman opened the meeting with a measured tone. "We are here to address the continued disruptions and allegations surrounding Mr. Bradley Henson." But the board didn't get far before parents erupted. One father stood, his voice booming. "My son was in that class. He saw it. That man threw her guitar and then tried to cover it up." Another parent added, "My daughter wanted to quit the program last year because of him. She said he made her feel worthless." More voices joined, rising into a chorus of anger. For every parent defending Bradley's decades of service, 3 more stood with stories of favoritism, intimidation, and discrimination. Danielle rose when called upon, her voice trembling but fierce. "My daughter has endured humiliation, lies, and now threats. Yet she still finds the strength to play music that inspires this community. If you keep him here, you're telling every child, especially every Black child, that their pain doesn't matter." Amara sat silently, tears stinging her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. This wasn't about weakness anymore. It was about truth. He addressed the board with shaking hands. "This is a witch hunt. One mistake, one in 20 years, and suddenly, I'm painted as a monster. That girl has manipulated the narrative to destroy me. I demand reinstatement." The room erupted with boos and shouts. Students whispered, "He still doesn't get it." Mr. Graham, the board chair, raised his hand for silence. His voice was firm. "Mr. Henson, this is not about one mistake. This is about a pattern, and the evidence is overwhelming." He turned toward the room. "After careful review, and in light of recent events, the board has voted unanimously." Amara's heart stopped. "Mr. Henson, you are hereby terminated, effective immediately. You will be stripped of tenure and banned from teaching within this district again." The room erupted. Applause, cheers, even tears. Danielle pulled Amara into her arms, whispering, "It's over, baby. You did it." Amara exhaled shakily, her chest loosening for the first time in months. Around her, students clapped. Parents hugged. Strangers reached out to shake her hand. For once, the room wasn't against her. It was with her. Bradley's eyes burned with venom. He didn't look at the board. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at Amara. "You think you've won?" he hissed under his breath as security approached. "You don't know what you've started."
They escorted him out, his career in ruins. The community celebrated, but Amara shivered at the chill in his voice.
That night, Amara sat in her room, scrolling through her phone. Messages of support poured in. Friends, strangers, even musicians from other towns reaching out. She should have felt at peace, but the unease lingered. Bradley's last words gnawed at her. Then another notification lit up her screen. A link. No sender name, just an anonymous drop. She hesitated, then clicked. Her breath caught. These kids don't belong in advanced ensembles. They lack the discipline. It's in their nature. Best to push them out early before they drag the rest down. Her stomach turned. The dates stretched back years. Names of students filled the emails. Naya, Marcus, Sophia, and others she didn't even know. All of them students of color. Amara dropped the phone, her chest heaving. The board hadn't just fired a man for losing his temper. They had uncovered the tip of something much darker. Bradley's private emails leaked, exposing years of racist complaints he had hidden. The leaked emails exploded, like wildfire. News outlets dissected them. Parents demanded accountability, and former students came forward with their own testimonies. What Amara had endured wasn't an isolated incident. It was the latest chapter in a long, ugly pattern. Bradley's name became synonymous with disgrace. Once celebrated as a strict but effective music teacher, he was now remembered for what he truly was, a man who had crushed dreams rather than nurtured them. His face flashed across screens, but no longer as a respected educator, instead as a cautionary tale. Amara, meanwhile, found herself standing in the light of a very different story. One afternoon, Marcus knocked on her door, a polished guitar case in his hands. Danielle answered, surprise flashing across her face as she ushered him in. Amara stepped from her room, her eyes widening when she saw the case. "This," Marcus said, setting it down gently, "is yours." Amara knelt, fingers trembling as she unlatched the clasps. Inside lay a brand new acoustic guitar, its wood gleaming under the living room light. The strings pristine, the neck smooth. She whispered, "I can't take this." Her throat tightened. She touched the strings, strummed once, and the rich, resonant sound filled the room. For the first time since her father's guitar had been destroyed, she felt not loss but possibility. Danielle wiped at her eyes quietly, her heart swelling at the sight of her daughter rising from pain into promise. They want me," she whispered. "A full scholarship. They want me." Danielle clasped her hands over her mouth, tears spilling as she laughed and cried all at once. "Oh, baby, you did it, you did it." Amara buried her face in her mother's shoulder, sobbing with relief. For every moment she had doubted herself, for every whisper that told her she didn't belong. This was the proof she had always needed. She was more than worthy. Her performances, now regular in parks and community spaces, began drawing not just crowds but attention from beyond Lincoln. Videos of her original songs reached thousands, then hundreds of thousands, then millions. Each clip wasn't just music, it was testimony. Viewers heard not just chords and lyrics, but resilience forged in fire. Messages poured in from Black students across the country. "Your story is my story. I was told I couldn't play violin because of my skin. Watching you makes me want to pick it up again." Amara realized her fight had never been only for herself. It was for every student told to sit in the shadows, every voice silenced before it could bloom. Meanwhile, Bradley sat in a one-bedroom apartment miles from the school he once commanded. His reputation was shattered, his savings drained by legal fees. The phone never rang with job offers. Friends avoided him. Even neighbors gave cold stares. One evening, he sat slumped in front of the television, flipping aimlessly through channels, until he froze. There, broadcast live, was Amara. She stood on a stage far larger than Lincoln's auditorium. The lights brighter, the audience louder. She cradled the guitar Marcus had given her, her voice rising through the speakers with breathtaking clarity. Bradley leaned forward, his jaw tight, his eyes unblinking. He had tried to silence her. He had told her she didn't belong. And yet here she was, her music carrying farther than he ever imagined, reaching places his rigid, hateful grip never could. For the first time he didn't feel anger. He felt something colder, heavier, regret. The realization that the very thing he tried to destroy had only grown stronger, brighter, unstoppable. Back in Lincoln, Amara's story became part of the town's identity. The protests quieted. The wounds began to heal. But her name remained etched in conversations, in classrooms, in hearts. Teachers whispered about the courage of the girl who stood against a system. Students carried her story as armor, proof that they could fight back. Even Principal Whitman, once caught between reputation and truth, began championing equity initiatives in the school. Amara herself kept moving forward. She studied under Marcus, prepared for her scholarship program, and played wherever people would listen. Each song was a thread of healing, woven not only for her, but for the community that had stood fractured and was now piecing itself together. One bright spring morning, Amara walked back to Lincoln High. She wasn't there for class. She wasn't there for Bradley. She was there for herself. She carried the new guitar in its case, the strap slung over her shoulder. Students milling outside froze when they saw her, whispering, pointing. Some smiled, some nodded, some simply stared in awe. Amara didn't stop. She walked across the courtyard, past the doors, and to the side of the building where her journey had begun. She paused beneath the classroom window, where Bradley had first glared at her, where the dream had nearly ended before it began. Slowly, she lifted the guitar from its case. The sun caught the polished wood, and for a moment, it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. She strummed once, the sound clear and strong, then smiled, a smile full of triumph, of healing, of defiance. It wasn't about Bradley anymore. It never really had been. It was about the strings of redemption, about reclaiming what was hers and leaving behind a legacy stronger than hate. The final shot was Amara holding her new guitar under the same classroom window where it all began, this time smiling. No child should ever have their dreams shattered because of the color of their skin. If you believe voices like hers deserve to be heard, type yes in the comments. And if this story broke your heart, hit subscribe, because more stories like this must be told.